Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by Real Good Foods. Real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, ahead of Veterans Day later this month, we're talking about T1D in the military. Yes, you can serve with type 1 diabetes, but there's a catch. You have to be diagnosed while you're already serving. That's what happened to Sergeant Major Mark Thompson.
And I'm blowing it up. I'm basically telling him there's nothing really wrong with me. I just have a cold, and I'm just here because the first sergeant told me to be here. And this air defense artillery guy leans over and goes, "Hey, man, sounds like you got type 1 diabetes." His wife was a type 1 diabetic, and so I got diagnosed by a type 3.
Mark didn't actually officially get diagnosed for another month. He shares his story and has advice for young people with diabetes who want to enlist and find out they aren't allowed. In Tell Me Something Good, a study at Fort Bragg that is changing the military's perception of type 1, and how a canoe trip through the Canadian wilderness changed a family's perception of life with diabetes. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. I am your host, Stacey Sims. I am fighting a cold. I apologize if my voice sounds a little bit off, but boy, I am feeling so excited right now because, yes, it's a great episode on the way. Love talking to Mark. And my book is out. The book is officially out. The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, Real Life Stories of Raising a Child with Type 1 Diabetes is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and in independent bookstores. Wow, it has been quite the journey. Lots of work and then lots of waiting and then a little bit of worry and then just excitement. A little bit more about the book at the end of the show. And if you're in the Facebook group, I've already mentioned this, but if you have pre-ordered it, please review it. And of course, if you've purchased it on Amazon, please leave a review as well. Tell your friends. The word of mouth is the best way for a book like this to get out there. And I really think that it's a message that needs to be heard by a lot of parents of kids with type 1. Let's fight that fear. Let's fight that pursuit of perfection that we know can't happen. Let's make our kids as safe and happy as we can. And definitely let me know what you think about the book. Oh, so excited. It is also, of course, Diabetes Awareness Month. But as in years past, this show isn't really going to change that much this month. I think November is for educating people outside our community, frankly. And this podcast is very much for people in the diabetes community. I would think it's safe to say we are pretty aware. I am, however, doing something focused on Veterans Day this episode. And Veterans Day is next Monday, so let's get right to that. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Have you ever tested your blood sugar with a meter and were unsure about the meaning of your result? Take the guesswork out of your numbers with the One Touch VarioFlex meter. It uses ColorSure technology to instantly show you when your or your loved one's blood sugar numbers are low, indicated by blue, in range green or high red, so you can quickly get on with your life. You can also use the meter's built-in Bluetooth smart technology to seamlessly sync with the One Touch Reveal mobile app. Available now as a free download for Android devices on Google Play and Apple devices on the App Store. One Touch, because taking a step forward starts with seeing where you are. My guest this week is Senior Army Career Counselor Sergeant Major Mark Thompson. He was diagnosed with diabetes in the year 2000, first mistakenly with type 2, and then accurately with LADA, which is basically a slower moving type 1. He'd been in the Army for 4.5 years at the time. He fought to stay in, and he won. He was deployed twice to Iraq, and now he works at the Pentagon. Mark is careful not to give what he calls false hope. Again, if you have any pre-existing condition of any kind, not just diabetes, right now you can't enlist in the U.S. military. But his case and others he mentions are still pretty inspiring. And he has a message for young people who do want to enlist, who want to serve and can't because of diabetes or any other health condition. Here is my interview with Sergeant Major Mark Thompson. Mark, thanks so much for joining me. I am fascinated by your story, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about it and about you. Thanks for jumping on.
Oh, I appreciate you having me, Stacey. Thank you.
All right, a lot to talk about here. You have a very unique experience. But let's go to the beginning. And when I say the beginning, usually that means I ask people about their diagnosis. But let's go to the beginning of your story, which is you joined the military kind of like, meh, let's see what happens, kind of on a whim. How does that happen?
It definitely does. So I'm from a small town in Iowa. I went off to college, and it was still in Iowa, and had some time to kill in between classes, and I was kind of in a rut. And honestly, I was in between girlfriends at the time. So that, there was that, looking for something new, nothing really keeping me there. So I decided to join the Army. I was eating lunch at a Subway right next to a recruiting station. I walked in, and by the time I got to the door, I hadn't even talked to the recruiter yet. I was like, whatever. Yeah, sure, I'll join the Army. 4 years, money for college, sounds like a great idea. So I walked in, and the recruiter had his back, and I was like, hi, I'm here to join. And he was obviously kind of shocked. Asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I'll be in the Army. I didn't realize we had jobs. Like there was specific skills that people in the Army had, because no movie ever says, let's have the 88 Mike transporter drive this vehicle, or they never really get into the specific jobs that people have in the Army. They're just soldiers. So it gives me this big book and says, flip through and find a job that you want. Well, I flipped through the book, and I flipped a little too far, and I saw this shield, and it had an eagle on it, and it said specialist. And I was like, I'd like to specialize in something. So I told the recruiter, I said, hey, I found the job I want. I want to be a specialist. And without blinking an eye or changing his tone or anything, he says, you don't qualify for that right now. But if you sign up for another job, and if you're good enough, if you've got what it takes, in about 2 years, the command will make you a specialist. I was like, woo, I'm in. Sign me up. I got this. I will prove them that I can be a specialist. Well, it turns out that's a rank. That's automatic if you've done nothing wrong once you hit 2 years, regardless of what job you're in. Never actually lied to me, but when I got to basic training and I realized that was a rank and not a job, when I chose air defense artillery to blow up airplanes, I was like, that's good. And I remember being at the MEPS, and the guy had a whole list of MOSs and jobs military occupational specialty jobs that I qualified for. I was going to be a specialist.
You're going to be a specialist. You're like, I got this because in 2 years, it doesn't matter what I'm doing now. That's great. Oh, and everybody around you was a specialist in 2 years.
Yeah.
So I am curious what you think now, looking back on the kid who did that. It obviously worked out very well for you. But, a decision made eating a sandwich in between classes, in between girlfriends, isn't always the best decision. Do you feel like maybe there was a nugget of something in there that you knew what you were doing, or was it all just chance?
Well, I think military is always something that was, I thought was cool. Like firefighter, police officer, those things that, as a little boy growing up, those are things you play. You play soldier, you play firefighter, you play policeman. Those are things growing up that you not maybe totally out in the open that you want to grow up and become, but subconsciously it's kind of there. So I think the impulse to join the Army, obviously now 23 and a half years later, was something that stuck with me. But I don't know, I'm always happy, and it's always a choice to re-enlist, to stay in the Army. And of course, when I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, that kind of threw a whole spin on it. Yeah,
well, let's go right there. Okay, so 4.5 years after that fateful decision, you're a specialist and much more at this point. What happened? You just, had you seen the signs for a while? Obviously, you got very sick.
Yes. So retrospect, looking back, the signs were obvious, but going through it, I just thought I had a cold or a flu. And I was a decent runner, and I went running with two first sergeants at the time I was a sergeant, E5, and I was very cocky, as a young guy. And these first sergeants are probably younger than I am now, but I went running with them, and I was talking smack, like, I'm going to run faster than you guys, whatever. We got, 30 feet, and I about fainted, about passed out. Wasn't very far. And they were asking me if I was dehydrated. I'm like, no, I'm drinking water constantly. I'm waking up in the middle of the night and my lips are stuck to my gums because I'm so thirsty, and I'm, drinking water till my stomach is sloshing around. I'm not dehydrated. So they ordered me to go to the medics, which I don't like going to the doctor like most people. Based on their order, I went to the medics, And I was very fortunate. There was another air defense artillery guy in there. He was in there for his over 40 physical. And I was 23 years old, but it's kind of an open area. And I'm talking to the medic. I'm like, yeah, I've got this sleeping for like 15 hours a day on the weekends and can't get enough sleep. I'm tired, peeing constantly, thirst, and, think I've lost weight, but, I'm really exercising. So I think that's what it is. And I'm blowing it up. I'm basically telling him there's nothing really wrong with me. I just have a cold, and I'm just here because the first sergeant told me to be here. And this air defense artillery guy leans over and goes, hey, man, sounds like you got type 1 diabetes.
No way.
His wife was a type 1 diabetic. And so I got diagnosed by a type 3. But the medic literally was like, oh, it's a blood test. We'll do that and figure it out. And, long story short, a month later, I finally get diagnosed.
Wow.
It was a very long process. They diagnosed me as a type 2 diabetic. It took a week for the fasting blood sugar test results to come back. I had to go to a different installation. I was stationed in Germany at the time. I had to go to a different installation to get the blood drawn. And they came back and said, yeah, we're going to have to do it again. You did it wrong.
Oh.
They blamed me for doing
You did your own blood draw wrong?
Well, my fasting blood sugar was a 294 or something. And they're like, no, do it again.
Oh,
so I did it again. And I was like, I didn't even chew gum. I swear, I promise I didn't eat anything.
Yeah.
So the medic finally comes in and says, yep, you've got diabetes in my office. And I was typing on the computer. I'm like, all right. I had no clue what it was. I just figured it was going to be a shot or a pill or something and, be done with it. Just run its course like, an antibiotic or something. I had no clue. When he said it was a disease, that caught my attention. They diagnosed me as a type 2 because of my age. And that really kind of set the course for me to make decisions that really pushed me to stay in the Army.
Well, so, okay, let's just get the rules straight. If you're type 2, you can stay in?
No. Now, the rules have changed. This was 2000.
Okay.
This is a while ago.
So what were the rules at the time?
At that time, the doctors that I was seeing when I got diagnosed, they said, as a type 2 diabetic, you just take medication, you're fine. There's no need to do anything. And now I had made points to get promoted to staff sergeant or E6, but it was a conditional promotion. This was November timeframe. I had a school date for January of 2001. So long as I went to school and graduated within 12 months of my conditional promotion, I was able to keep the rank, keep the promotion. Extra money and plus more the prestige of getting that promotion was kind of a big deal. So I said, okay, asked the doctor, I'm like, well, I got this, diagnosis of, type 2 diabetes. Is that going to hold me back? Like, it's just pills. You're fine. Of course, that was back then. And maybe the doctor I was talking to, but I got the green light to do it. So I did that. So December 1st, 2000, I get promoted to staff sergeant. Big deal. Yay. And at the time, I was taking like 6 pills for breakfast, 4 for lunch, 6 for dinner, and my blood sugar stabilized at 400.
Right back to Mark finishing that story because you can be darn sure his blood sugar did not stay at 400. Oh, my goodness. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. When you have a toddler diagnosed with type 1, you hear rumblings for a long time about the teen years. But when it hit us at full force a little early, I was so glad we had Dexcom. Benny's insulin needs started going way up around age 11, and he has grown, I don't even know how many inches. 7, 8 in the last 3 to 4 years. Along with the hormone swings, I really can't imagine managing diabetes during this crazy time without the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system. We can react more quickly to highs and lows, see trends, and adjust insulin doses with advice from our endocrinologist. I know using the Dexcom G6 has helped improve Benny's A1C and overall health. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. To learn more, just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Mark talking about when they started to realize it probably wasn't type 2 that he was dealing with.
They finally do some other tests, and they come back and they say, okay, you know what, my bad. You've got type 1 diabetes. You got to take shots now, and now you have to go through this medical evaluation board and, maybe kicked out of the Army. And I'm like, oh, no, wait a minute. That means the promotion goes away. So my initial response was like, I needed to just get through the course. I just needed to go to the course, get through the course, and so I could keep my promotion. And if I got separated after that, okay, I got separated still as a staff sergeant, something, that I wanted to earn.
Right.
spoiler alert, I was able to stay in.
Well, and I know there's more to it than that, but let me clarify first before we go forward. And pardon my ignorance here. So you said in 2000, type 2 and type 1 would both not be allowed to stay in, generally speaking.
Well, any medical condition that soldiers get diagnosed with, there's an evaluation that they do. If you had to inject insulin, you're mandated. You had to go to a medical evaluation board immediately.
Got it.
Other conditions, it's like, oh, maybe you'll get better. You don't have to necessarily go to the board right away, and the doctors can kind of give you an evaluation period. Like if you break your leg, they're not going to separate you from the Army if you break your leg. You're going to heal, and it'll be fine, and you'll be good. But there are certain things you get, that happen medical-wise to soldiers that they automatically say, okay, this is a serious condition. We're going to have to evaluate to see whether or not your continued service is in the best interest of the Army and yourself.
I'm not quite sure this is the right way to ask this, but I'll ask it anyway. How did you manage to stay in? Because you're the only person that I know of, certainly the only person I've talked to, who was able to kind of keep your military career, at least for a little while after diagnosis.
I was very fortunate that even though the infancy of internet in 2000, I mean, if you remember, we didn't know of Google back then.
Oh, right.
I literally went to askjeeves.com, if you remember that website. I distinctly remember typing in, like, what is diabetes, and trying to figure that out. I had the goal. I wanted to stay in, right? Because I was living my dream. I was doing great things. I was really happy with my job. I was in Germany. I'm from Iowa, but I'm living in Germany. Wow. It was great. But I had to educate myself. At that time, there was 2 endocrinologists for all of Europe. The first appointment that I could get was 6 months later.
You mean military endocrinologists, just to be clear?
Correct.
US, yeah.
So I did research it myself. So educate to figure out what did I need to do? How did I need to get my blood sugars under control, get my A1C down? All that was self-taught. But I had that motivation to, like, okay, one, not only just losing my job, but my main concern was keeping my promotion, this thing that I had worked very hard to get. Even if they separated me afterward, I wanted to still be separated at that. But I'm not the only one. I know of quite a few other type 1 diabetics that are in the Army that have been able to stay in. They all have to go through their individual struggle because everything is a case-by-case basis. And I'm very fortunate that way back when I had a couple news articles done on me. And so some soldiers, as they get diagnosed, they'll find me on the email, the Army's email system. And they'll reach out and ask, are you the Mark Thompson, type 1? And I've got like a kind of a draft, like, oh, so you've been diagnosed in the Army with type 1. Here's what I did, and here's what I recommend that you do, and then help them through. And I've been able to assist. Unfortunately, about a half and half. It kind of depends. I was very fortunate, the timing that I got diagnosed, the doctors that I had, or lack thereof in some cases, that I was able to prove that I could still serve.
Now, not only did you serve, you didn't stay in Germany. I mean, you went to Iraq, right?
Yes. Yep. I deployed to Iraq 2004, 2005, part of Operation Iraqi Freedom 2, OIF 2. And that was a process because the initial thing is, no, you can't go.
Right.
It was a very long process to get found fit for duty. And when I got found fit for duty, I didn't get found fit for duty to stay in the Army and stay at home. So when the opportunity came up to do the job that you train for, to deploy, I took advantage of it. And it was kind of a step in process, but I was able to educate and advocate for myself with my leadership to say, okay, I've got this, I've got control. And, there's always a fear factor for people who don't know diabetes, because everybody has an uncle who has a barber who has a cat that has diabetes, and that's the same thing, right?
Right, of course.
Or something. To try to educate them on, okay, this is what's going to go wrong. I know it's going to go wrong. And here's what I'm going to do when that goes wrong to ensure that I'm not becoming a liability and have to be sent home early or become a liability to other people. So it's not just a confidence factor of, I got this, but more of an education of, I've got this. When things go wrong, this is exactly what I'm going to do to make sure that, the mission is still met and I'm not going to pull people out of the fight for diabetes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we always hear, right, is that it's not necessarily that you can't take care of yourself, quote unquote. It's that you might put other people in danger if you have a low blood sugar, if you need assistance. Obviously the military had the answer to this question. But let me ask you, did you think it was fair for you to go? Do you think it is right? Are you worried about putting other people at risk?
No, but that again, that is a case by case and maybe a timing. As you know, there's no such thing as a perfect diabetic, right? We have our highs, we have our lows. That's every day. So whether you're hiking in the woods, walking in Walmart, you're going to have a high, you're going to have a low. How do you deal with it? And this was before CGM, before the technology we have. So I was checking my sugar 10, 14 times a day to kind of see where I was at, what I was doing, and how it was going.
Wow.
And that was part of the plan that I laid out to not only my leadership, but also to the doctors to get the green light to go. Like, I've got this. This is what I'm going to do. This is how, it's simple, especially in layman's terms, right? It's simple. Type 1 diabetes is simple. If your sugar's high, you take insulin to bring it down. If it's low, you eat food to bring it up, especially to somebody who doesn't know.
It sounds so simple.
It sounds very simple, right? Promising to educate everybody that I worked with that, hey, if these are the signs and symptoms of going low, because the high didn't really matter as much.
Right.
You would have to have a sustained high for a while to have issues. And I've deployed twice in Iraq and the Philippines. I've traveled all over the world for the Army, for travel, vacation-wise, done numerous things. I've had people tell me that they wish people would stop telling me I can't do something, because then it's just prove that I can. It really boils down to that defining what goal do I want to do. Just because there's somebody says you can't do something, if I don't want to do it, it's fine. I still don't want to do it. But if I want to do something, then, okay, I need to educate myself on how to do it, the preparation, and really, truly preparing for what's going to go wrong.
Did anything go wrong while you were in Iraq or when you were deployed anywhere?
No, I spent a year in Iraq and no issues. Of course, I had highs, I had lows, but I never had a severe low or a low that, that I couldn't correct myself. Nobody ever had to help me out. Same thing with the highs. Now, I did break my insulin pump. The weight of the body armor, when I was traveling, it would sit. The body armor would sit on my pump, and I didn't realize it. And the buttons stopped working, which I planned for. I had the needle backups. There weren't pens back then. I just had the needles. And that was clear and cloudy. That was the NPH and the regular insulin.
I'm still surprised that you said insulin pump, because we're talking about, the early 2000s. So not a lot of people had insulin pumps. I mean, they were theirs, but.
Yeah, it was the Minimed 508. It was an old, you could hear it click. And, it had a shockproof, waterproof case that I put it in, and Frio pouches that I put it in to keep it cool and the insulin cool for the heat. But when it broke, I went to using the supply of insulin needles that I had. But part of that preparation that I did was I made sure that I took way more supplies than I needed, that I thought that I was going to need. And I had the hospital, the medic area there had extra supplies shipped before I even got there, just in the event that my supplies broke or got lost or whatever the case may be. So I had a lot of backups. Now, what I didn't plan on was a sustain. I went about a month without an insulin pump, and I ran out of insulin needles.
You'd think that would be easy to get.
Well, no, because the military doesn't really have a lot of people using insulin.
Oh, good point.
Especially in Iraq. They have needles. They're the big needles that they use for anything they want to inject you with. So I got a supply of those instead.
Oh.
That was extremely painful. I had the bruises. It was bad. I was very happy to see that pump come in. And when our mail system finally came through, I was so happy to get the new pump.
Oh, man, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, but it was worth it. But that was a contingency. That was if it goes wrong, what is your backup? And, had to use it. And everything turned out okay.
So this is the early 2000s. I don't want to fast forward through everything, but you're still in the military. You obviously, you're able to stay in. You're not doing, I would assume you're not doing active duty tours like that, but maybe you are. Bring me up to speed if you could as to, where you are now.
Now, that was 2004, so fast forward, we're 15 years later. The Army career is gone. Coming out of Iraq, I took an instructor job for 3 years. And that was actually pretty interesting because I traveled a lot to different installations. I spent 33 weeks on the road in 3 years, 1 week at an installation. So I went to 27 different installations across the world to teach, as well as teaching at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Went from there, I went to airborne school to jump out of airplanes. And that was another diabetes problem where it's written right in Army policy that, if you have diabetes, you can't go to airborne school. Long story short, I was able to get an exception to that policy, proving that I could handle it.
Well, wait a second.
Came off the pump.
Don't long story short it. Yeah, tell us what happened and how you did that, if you don't mind. See, I interrupted you. You said you were coming off the pump for that?
So I didn't know anything about airborne school. I didn't know anything about jumping out of airplanes. I was in mechanized units and so not non-airborne units in my career up to that point. And my old boss was in a position to, that I was if I went to airborne, I was able to go work for him again. So it was a really awesome mentor of mine, and I wanted that opportunity. So a coworker of mine, we both went to get our airborne physicals, to go to the doctor and get, see whether or not you can are medically qualified to jump out of airplanes. And she got denied. She had a neck issue. And I got denied initially, but I was able to override that. I contacted the final approval authority and sent them all my evaluations, physical fitness reports, tests, and wrote a lengthy worded email on exactly why I think I should and be able to do. And I got approved. She was so mad. She's like, "What? You don't have a pancreas. You can go. I can't go." She was so mad.
Well, so wait a second. Is this whole story about your ability to write a really good letter?
I had that. Yes, that is a superpower of mine.
That's a skill. That's really funny. So, okay, I'm not even going to ask you why this mentor was worth jumping out of airplanes for. I mean, you hadn't done that your whole career. You really decided to go there just because you thought, well, I like this guy and this job sounds okay?
Well, the job was really cool. It was with Special Forces Command. After diagnosis, I switched my career field to being an Army career counselor, which is somebody who's responsible for, it's exactly how it sounds, a career counselor, but re-enlisting soldiers to keep them in the Army and helping guide them through their career, whether it's reclassifying or getting promoted. So educating soldiers on what they need to do to advance and take full advantage of their Army career and letting commands know how they can do the same thing for the soldiers. So it's a very interesting job. I love it. It's great. The airborne route, it's intriguing, right? It's definitely something that...
That's one way to put it.
It's a very Army thing to do, right? The skydiving is way different than static line jumping out of an airplane.
Right, that's true.
With the Army. But I didn't know how the harness would affect the insulin tubing on the pump. So I voluntarily, without asking anybody, I just made up my mind, let me come off the pump and go back to using needles and make sure that's going to be okay.
Wow.
So I did, and I was able to go to airborne school, graduated, no issues. Gladly went right back on the pump because I figured out that if you land properly, the harness doesn't mess with the insulin cord or anything. So I just cut holes in the uniform to run the tubing through and put it in the correct pockets so it wouldn't get injured. And I spent 8 years jumping.
All right. Now, you mentioned, and it went quickly, the difference between what I think of when people jump out of planes with the parachute and what you actually did.
No. It's regular, I say regular airborne. The Army airborne, it's called a static line. Your parachute's actually, you hook it up to the airplane, and when you walk off the plane, it's not really jumping, you walk out of the plane. You don't jump up to go down. You walk right out the door with a purpose. The line is attached to the plane. So as you're falling, it's about 4 seconds, and then your parachute line snaps and the parachute opens up, and then you fall to the ground properly.
Are there any videos online of this? I'd love to kind of look at it. Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
right.
If you literally type in Army Airborne, there'll be a ton.
Okay. So what do you do now?
I'm still doing the career counseling piece for the Army. I work the Army's retention policy, just working at the Pentagon now.
What's it like to walk into the Pentagon every day for your job? You've still got to get a little thrill out of that.
I really do. There's long days, still a lot of travel, but that is a building. It's an impressive building. It's massive. But the people that work there, you're surrounded by military civilians that have that common goal to do everything in their power to make sure that the safety of our nation is secure. And it sounds very cliche, but you see it. You see the passion for everybody, no matter what their job title is. And it makes you want to be better at whatever you do, just because you're surrounded by professionals that are working and motivated.
That's great. The first question I'm sure you get from young people with type 1 is, can I do what you did? But if you're already diagnosed with type 1, you can't serve in the military, right?
Unfortunately, no. And it's not specifically just type 1. It's any pre-existing medical condition that's a chronic condition. And there's a whole list of things. But pre-existing, no. But once people that are in the Army, any branch of service, that if they get a medical condition that happens, they will go through a medical evaluation board, a physical evaluation board, and they'll be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So it's not like lockstep, you've got this, now you've got to go. They do review and see, okay, can you perform, can you serve?
Do you guide younger people who want to serve in the military and have type 1 already? Are there ways to guide them to support roles or civilian roles or things that they can do?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, kind of going back to what I said earlier, as a kid, they kind of lump them all together, the firefighter, the policeman, the soldier. And I've heard, different people. There's even on your show with the lady that's a SWAT team member for the FBI. That's awesome. There's other things that people can do to still serve their country. We wait for that cure that was 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
When was that going to happen?
5 years from now.
10 years. Yeah. But it's, who knows in the future, I'm not a big fan of false hope, but if not right now, can't join with pre-existing condition, but who knows in the future. But regardless of serving in the military, there's other ways to serve your public, serve your city, serve your country that aren't always military.
That's a great point. Before I let you go, we've talked a little bit about the technology that you used back in the day. Things have come a long way. Do you use a CGM now, are you still back? Are you back on an insulin pump?
I am on an insulin pump. I prefer an insulin pump. I like the flexibility of it, and especially with travel. Traveling with an insulin pump is so much easier, international travel especially. But I'm Dexcom G6, and that is awesome. That is a life changer when it comes to just predicting. I just finished the Army 10 miler and prep here in a week and a half for the Marine Corps full marathon. And the CGM, I've done the long runs without them, but it's so much better with them. I don't hit those walls, don't hit the sugar walls, the really highs or the really lows. You're able to react within enough time. It's always set the alarms higher, lower as needed in those intense situations, and it helps out.
When we met at the Falls Church Friends for Life conference, I learned that you kind of informed a couple of military families, people with children who have type 1, to come to the conference and learn more. And I'm curious, we all say, and I'll say at the end here probably, thank you for your service. And, we don't do enough for people serving and for our veterans. But in the diabetes community, is there anything that we can do for our military families that are living with type 1, either people like yourself, adults with type 1, or for those who are raising children with it? Is there anything that we can do?
The community is amazing in and itself. It really is. I don't know if there's anything more. I mean, just being the community as I've experienced it, regardless of the military affiliation, is always there to reach out and help and support. This disease is unique.
To say the least.
But when you live with it or you have a loved one with it, it really changes your perspective. And when you find out that there's somebody else with it, there's that connection immediately. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about the diabetes community is that immediate bond, that connection, and the willingness to help each other out. Knowing that everybody has their own type 1 diabetes rules for success, or tricks for getting over the highs and lows, and whether they're doing multiple daily injections or pumps or whatever the case may be. But the sharing of information, hey, have you tried this? I tried this, it works for me. But without the, this is the only way. I've never felt that. So in addition to that, to the military families, I mean, there's nobody serves for the appreciation, right? It is truly a selfless service, and it's appreciated, obviously, with any additional kind of support that we get just from the moving and the unknown and things like that. But the type 1 diabetes community in and itself is awesome and is amazing.
It really is. Well, Mark, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. I will say thank you once again, not only for coming on, certainly, but thank you for your service. And thank you for sharing all of that, because it's just one of those, it seems like such a unique story. And it's so nice to know that there are other people, not, as you've said a few times, not just with diabetes, but who have been able to, live their dream and keep their military service intact. And I think you don't like false hope, but I think you've given hope to people who do want to serve, and maybe some inspiration to find another way. So I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Well, Stacey, thank you. I really, long-time listener, and I really do appreciate everything that you do, talking to the different companies and spreading the good news stories, along with some of the stuff that's not so good.
Yeah.
Like the title of your book is amazing. But I do, it's a reality piece. So I really do appreciate what you do for our community.
Oh my gosh, Mark, thank you so much.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I'll link up more information about Mark's story. As he said, there's a lot of write-ups about him, especially in the early 2000s. And I will link that up in the show notes. I'm also going to put the interview with Caroline Marshall. He mentioned the FBI SWAT team lady. That's her. She is the first woman with type 1 to be on an FBI SWAT team, but she's not the first person with type 1. And her story is really great. I think it goes to Mark's point about finding a way to serve. And if your child's dream is to be in the military, to serve their country, hopefully some of these stories can really help them find a way to do that, to serve, even if it isn't in active duty military. Some really incredible role models. But coming up in just a moment in Tell Me Something Good, we're going to talk a little bit about a new military study that is changing some minds about how they look at people with type 1 diabetes. Tell Me Something Good is brought to you by Real Good Foods. Real Good Foods can be found in more than 10,000 retail locations in almost every major city. It is so nice and convenient to just go to your grocery store, freezer, or Walmart and find low in carb, high protein, really convenient food that tastes good. I mean, you can go to their website and order everything because not every product is in every store, but they also have a store locator. And I love, Harris Teeter is the one we use. I can go there. I get the pizzas that Benny likes. We can get the poppers. They don't carry the breakfast sandwiches yet, but I can go to the store locator and find other stores near me and make it really easy. Another thing that's great on the website is this comparison when they go through and they show you the different products, and it's kind of like an us versus them, how many carbs, how much protein are in different products compared to the Real Good Foods, the enchiladas, the poppers, the chicken crust pizza. And it's so easy to make everything. You're basically heating things up, so it's easy for kids, and it tastes great. Find out more about Real Good Foods. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. When I was looking into cases of type 1 diabetes in the Army, in the military, Mark's story comes up, as do a few others. In fact, there's a really good article from Diabetes Mine from a couple of years back that I'll link up as well with other cases. But I also found a study from the Journal of Diabetes Science and Technology that's online that looked specifically at U.S. Army soldiers with type 1 diabetes. This was published last spring, April of 2018. I'm just going to read a little bit from it to you, and I'll link it up as well. It says, U.S. Army soldiers diagnosed with type 1 diabetes were previously considered unfit for duty. For highly motivated soldiers, current advanced technologies allow the possibility of not only retention on active duty, but military deployment. We present our experience at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, taking care of soldiers newly diagnosed with type 1. Through intensive diabetes education, extensive military and physical training, optimization of diabetes technology, and remote real-time monitoring, soldiers are able to continue to serve their country in the most specialized roles. This was really fascinating. They used both Medtronic and Dexcom sensors to monitor soldiers. They even said, I'll read again, in particular, the Dexcom G5 is helpful as it provides the ability for our entire team to see real-time glucose values. As an example, when a soldier is going on a timed 10-mile road march, the soldier, medical team, and unit assets are able to remotely monitor real-time values. Man, I thought I kept a close eye on Benny. Can you imagine having your team watching you during all that? It's really interesting. They studied 50 soldiers, 50, so a smaller study, but pretty significant, people with type 1 who were diagnosed while in the military. And they retained 18 soldiers. Of the 18 retained, all use insulin pumps. All but one used a CGM. They did point out that either technology is not a requirement for retention, but it was just an observation within this study. 5 had deployments, and all of those deployed successfully completed their tours. And again, I'll link it up so you can read it. The discussion and conclusion here talk about this really has to be done on a case-by-case basis, which I thought was very interesting. They didn't draw any general conclusions. Interestingly, there's a footnote in here. They did not use any closed-loop systems. Interestingly, there was a note here that the Medtronic 670G closed-loop system was not included specifically because military insurance did not allow use. And at the time of the study, that was the only hybrid closed loop available. So my guess is that if these men and women at Fort Bragg can get another okay for their study, if they could use closed loops, I wonder if they'll repeat it or try to do more. But there's a lot more to this study. I'll link it up. You can look at it. It doesn't change any policy, but in my opinion, it might be the building block that could be used to start changing policy. So we shall see. Overall, though, I thought it was a really good bit of news that I hadn't heard about before. Our other Tell Me Something Good isn't really a military story, but one that was shared in the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. Please join if you haven't already. And Brian Mosashek wrote in that he was going through some files and he ran across this photo. He says, this is one of my favorite photos. It's a photo of my dad, my 2 brothers, and myself. It shows my MiniMed 506 insulin pump. And this is a great picture. It's 4 guys. They look kind of serious, but they're all in matching T-shirts and hats. There's a waterfall behind them. You can tell that they've just accomplished something. And Brian goes on to write, it was taken on the last day of a 10-day canoe trip through the Canadian wilderness in 1998. My dad and I took the trip with the Boy Scouts in 1992, and we said when my brothers got old enough, we would all go back. I was diagnosed with diabetes in 1994 and thought that the future trip would have to be canceled. I started a MiniMed pump in 1996. The trip was a fantastic success. We had a great time, and I have no recollection of my diabetes affecting the trip at all. I'm sure I had a few low blood sugars that had to be treated. Now, 21 years after that trip was taken, I still hear people say you shouldn't do things because you are diabetic, Mark says. You absolutely can. The technology is so much better. The knowledge is so much greater. I didn't let my diabetes take away a great bonding opportunity with my dad and brothers in 1998. You don't have to let it take away anything today. Mark, this is so cool. Thank you so much for posting. And one of the coolest parts about the picture is that Mark is standing up and he's got the MiniMed pump around his waist in a waterproof case. So even back then, and oh my God, if the mid-90s are back then, I can't believe I just said that. But you know what I mean? In pumping, right? In terms of pumping, that was a long time ago. And it just goes to show that people adapted and did what they needed to do. And then the other cool thing about this is that in the group, other people chimed in with, this is great. I did a 5-day rafting trip with my dad, or, where was this? Our scout group goes all the time. And I loved the conversation that happened here around this. So Brian, thank you so much for sharing. What a great picture. What a great snapshot of a time when a family said, you know what? Diabetes isn't going to keep us from doing the things that we love. Yes, you might have to wear basically a fanny pack of a waterproof pump around your waist. But if that's what it takes, let's go. If you have a story like that or anything that would fit in for Tell Me Something Good, and I'm talking anything from an anniversary to a milestone to a study that you'd like to, hear more about, please email me, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. Pop it in the Facebook group. Tell me on social media, however you want to reach out. I'd love to feature it. Tell me something good. As I said at the beginning of the show, The World's Worst Diabetes Mom is out. The book is out, and I'm so excited. If you are one of the people who pre-ordered from an appearance or from my website before this past weekend, it went up on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, the retail outlets, that sort of thing. If you had already ordered a copy and you have it, and you love it, please post a review, post it on Amazon, or get on Facebook or social media. Use the hashtag World's Worst DMOM. That way I can find it. And let people know what you think. If you hated it, I mean, you could go ahead and tell people that. I would rather you kind of forget you ever found it, if that's the case. But if you love it, it would be great if you could spread the word. There is going to be an audio book that is just a little bit behind. The goal there is probably 10 days past when it went on Amazon. So hopefully early next week or mid next week, the audio book will come out as well. And that'll be on Audible, which is part of Amazon. And please make sure if you get it on Audible, I'm going to say it here and then you'll be hearing it and I'll be posting on social media. Use the link that we provide because Diabetes Connections listeners, if you're not on Audible yet, you get your first book free just by going through my link, and you get 30 days free as well on Audible. So it's a really good deal. It's really easy. And if you've never listened to an audiobook before, but you're already listening to podcasts, oh my gosh, you are missing out. It's the best. I love audiobooks. I listen to them all the time, but I will make sure that if you're in the newsletter list, you'll be getting the Audible link. If you're on social media, I'll be posting it. If you're not sure, don't get on Audible without having it. So you can always contact me on social media or on email or whatever. I just don't want you to pay extra if you don't have to. And don't worry about me. I still get paid. Audible pays me. Audible pays its authors and narrators, even through the free deal. So don't worry about that because I know some of you are thinking that because you're good people. Okay, coming up, we have some interesting stuff in the works. We're going to have a bonus episode most likely in the next couple of days about Gvoke, the new stable glucagon from Xeris. Why the heck did they come out with two formulations? Well, it's the same formula, but two ways to inject. Have you seen this? They have two different ways. One is more of a pen. One is more of a syringe. Why did they spend the extra money? It's really an interesting story, and it has a lot to do with first responders and stable glucagon. So that is coming up. And then the following week, our regular scheduled podcast next Tuesday is all about dealing with difficult relatives for the holidays. Thanksgiving is coming up and all the winter holidays. And if you're worried about what the heck is going to happen at Thanksgiving, Maura McCarthy and I answer your questions in a Dear D-Moms dedicated to how to handle the holidays. Everybody stay calm. It's going to be okay. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. And thank you for listening. I'm so appreciative that you're here, you're listening, we're talking. This listenership, this audience is just amazing. I love hearing from you, and it's a privilege to do the show every week. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.